The whispering window. In a small village, nestled between rolling hills and endless fields of swaying wheat, there stood a house. Not grand, not crumbling, but unremarkable in its simplicity. A single-story cottage with ivy clawing up its stone walls. At the back, a single window sat slightly askew, its frame never quite flush with the wall. The locals called it the miller's house, though no miller had lived there for generations. It was a place of quiet, of solitude, but also of whispers, stories told in hushed tones about that window, stories no one quite believed. Eleanor arrived in the village during a damp autumn, fleeing the clamor of city life. She was a woman of modest desires, a stack of books, a kettle for tea, and evenings spent by a crackling fire. The cottage was perfect, its quirks charming, except for that window. Its glass was old, warped, catching the moonlight in strange, liquid patterns. At night, it hummed, a vibration, like a voice trapped in the panes, murmuring just beyond comprehension. On her third night, as Eleanor lay in bed, the hum sharpened into words, faint, delicate, like a breath fogging the glass. It whispered, "Look out." She sat up, her heart steady, but her curiosity piqued. Barefoot, she crossed the cold wooden floor to the window. The glass was misted, though the night outside was clear. She wiped it with her sleeve, and for a fleeting moment, she saw it. A face, not hers, pressed against the other side. Its features were soft, blurred, like a reflection in a rain-soaked puddle, but its eyes held hers, unblinking. Eleanor told herself it was the moonlight, a trick of tired eyes. But the whispers persisted, night after night, always the same. Look out. Never louder, never clearer, yet impossible to ignore. She tried closing the curtains, but the words slipped through, weaving into her dreams. She dreamed of fields that stretched too far, of shadows that moved without bodies, of a figure standing just beyond the window, waiting, its breath warm against the glass. Curiosity, stronger than fear, took hold. One evening, Eleanor lit a candle, its flame flickering in the drafty room, and sat by the window. "Who are you?" she whispered. "What do you want?" The air thickened, the rain outside slowing to a faint drip. The window didn't answer in words, but in a sensation, a gentle pull, like an invisible hand beckoning her closer. She pressed her palm to the glass. It was warm, impossibly so, as if the night itself were alive, breathing against her skin. And next morning, she found scratches on the window's exterior, thin, deliberate lines, forming shapes she couldn't decipher. She asked the villagers about the house. They shifted, uneasy, and spoke of a woman who'd lived there decades ago, a recluse named Lydia, who spent her nights by that window, staring into the dark as if waiting. She vanished one autumn, leaving only her name and stories of whispers that never stopped. Eleanor stayed. She couldn't leave, not now. Each night, She sat by the window, listening. The whispers softened, less urgent, as if her presence soothed them. Look out became a lullaby, a strange comfort in her solitude. She began to notice other signs, faint outlines in the frost, like fingerprints that weren't hers, a shadow that lingered too long in the glass, even when no one stood behind her. She wrote in her journal, detailing the whispers. One night, she found a locket hidden in a crack beneath the window, its surface engraved with the letter L. Inside was a faded photograph of a woman, her eyes wide, her expression caught between fear and longing. Eleanor kept it close, feeling its weight as she sat by the window. The whispers grew quieter, almost tender, as if thanking her for staying. She began to speak to the window each night, telling it stories of her own. Her childhood, her losses, her hopes. The glass seemed to listen, its warmth spreading through her fingers. Months passed, and Eleanor changed. She spoke less to the villagers, her eyes carrying a distant glow. She spent her evenings by the window, her silhouette a fixture against the glass. The whispers were faint now, barely audible, but she felt them, like a pulse in the air. One night, as she drifted to sleep, she felt a presence, not touching her, but holding the air around her, warm and weightless, like a hand that never closed. The villagers noticed her absence first. Her cottage was empty, the locket gone, the window clear of scratches. They found her journal, its pages filled with words that weren't hers, descriptions of fields that never ended, of a woman waiting beyond the glass. They sealed the window shut, but on quiet nights they heard it. Two voices woven together, whispering as the wheat fields swayed under the moon. The miller's house stood silent, its window glowing faintly, not with light, but with something older, something waiting. The lantern's keeper, on a jagged cliff, where the sea roared and the fog clung like a shroud, stood a lighthouse. Not the tallest, not the grandest, but old, older than the village below, older than the tales whispered about it. They called it Blackthorn Light, and its keeper was a figure of legend, spoken of in tones reserved for ghosts. The villagers avoided the cliff path at night, saying the light cast shadows that moved on their own, that the wind carried voices no one could name. Thomas arrived in winter, a man who craved solitude over the noise of human company. The lighthouse was his sanctuary, its iron staircase spiraling upward, its lantern flickering against the gray sea, its silence a balm. On his first night, as he climbed to the lantern room, he noticed something wrong. The light didn't flicker with the steady rhythm of its mechanism. It pulsed, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat echoing through the stone walls. He checked the gears, the oil, the glass. Everything was in order, yet the pulsing continued. By the fifth night, a new sound joined it, a low tapping, like fingers drumming on the iron walls. Thomas blamed the wind, the sea, the creaking age of the tower. But the taps grew rhythmic, purposeful, like a message scratched out in the dark. On the seventh night, he sat in the lantern room. The light casting long, shifting shadows, and listened. The taps formed words, faint and rasping. "Stay with me." Thomas was no coward. He stayed, tending the light, but the tower began to reveal itself. Footprints appeared in the dust of the staircase, too small to be his. A cold spot lingered in the lantern room, unmoved by the fire he stoked. Once, in the deepest hour of night, a shadow crossed the glass, too tall, too thin, its edges fraying like smoke. He began a journal, noting the taps. The villagers had warned him in their way. They spoke of the last keeper, a man who'd tended Blackthorn Light for decades, his eyes always fixed on the sea. He'd vanished one winter, leaving only his coat folded neatly in the lantern room. Thomas found it in a cupboard, the fabric heavy with salt, its pockets holding a single key, rusted and cold. He tried it in every lock in the tower, but it fit nothing, its purpose a mystery. One stormy night, the tapping stopped. The silence was heavier than the storm. Thomas climbed to the lantern room, the wind screaming outside. The light burned steady now, unnaturally bright, its glow cutting through the fog like a blade. He pressed his face to the glass, his breath clouding it, and saw it, a figure on the cliff's edge, holding a lantern of its own. Its light pulsed in sync with Blackthorn's, and its form, if it had one, dissolved into the mist. Thomas began to dream of the sea, not as it was, but as something alive, its waves curling like fingers, its depths whispering his name. He wrote less, slept less, his days blurring into nights spent watching the light. The key grew warm in his pocket, though he never touched it. One night, he woke to find the lantern room door locked from the outside, though he was alone. The key turned in the lock, and the door opened to reveal the cliff, the figure closer now, its lantern brighter. The villagers found Thomas at dawn, seated in the lantern room, staring at the sea. The light still burned, though the oil should have run dry hours ago. He didn't speak, didn't move, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Took him away, and the lighthouse stood empty for years. His journal surfaced later, its pages brittle. The final entry, reading only, "I stayed. Sailors passing by swear they see two lights on the cliff. One from the tower and one from a figure that stands beside it, its lantern glowing through the fog, never fading. On foggy nights, the villagers hear a faint tapping, a whisper from the cliff, calling for the next keeper. The hollow path. The forest outside Eldwood was no place for wanderers. Its trees were ancient, their branches knitting a canopy that choked the light. Through its heart ran a trail, narrow and winding, called the Hollow Path. No one knew its maker or its age, but it was always there, a scar in the woods. The villagers said to walk it at night was to invite company, something that followed, something that whispered. Clara came to Eldwood in spring, a painter drawn to the town's somber beauty. She heard the tales, but dismissed them as rustic superstition. One evening, restless, she took her sketchbook and ventured onto the hollow path, eager to capture the forest's strange allure. The air was cool, the leaves hissing softly as she walked. The path seemed to stretch, longer than it should, its edges blurring in the dusk. But Clara pressed on. Halfway down, she heard it. A second set of footsteps, faint but steady, mirroring her own. She stopped. They stopped. She quickened her pace, and they followed, never closer, never farther. Turning, she saw only shadows, yet the air grew thick, as if eyes watched from the dark. "Hello?" she called. The forest swallowed her voice, and in its place came a whisper, dry as dead leaves. "Follow me." Clara gripped her sketchbook, her heart calm but her mind racing. She walked on, blaming the wind, the trees, her own imagination. The footsteps persisted, now joined by a faint hum, a melody she didn't know, yet felt familiar. The path opened to a clearing, a circle of bare earth with a single tree at its center, its trunk hollowed out, a gaping maw in the twilight. Her sketchbook slipped open, revealing pages she hadn't touched, drawings of faces, eyes, hands, all in her style, but not her hand. She ran, the footsteps chasing, louder, faster. The path twisted, looping back to the clearing, no matter her direction. The whispers multiplied. "Follow, follow," a chorus weaving through the trees. Clara stopped at the hollow tree, breathless. The air pulled at her, urging her toward the trunk. She touched it, and it was warm, pulsing faintly, like a heart buried in the wood. She stepped back, but the pull grew stronger, the whispers softer, almost pleading. Clara began to return each night, drawn to the clearing. She sketched the tree, its hollow growing larger in her drawings, its edges sharper. The footsteps followed her home, faint, but ever present, and her dreams filled with the path, the tree, the faces she hadn't drawn. She told no one, but the villagers noticed her eyes, how they seemed to see beyond them. She painted less, her canvases filled with shapes she didn't remember creating. One night, she walked the path and didn't return. At dawn, the villagers found her sketchbook, its pages blank. The hollow path remained, quiet, waiting. Those who walk it at night hear her voice, woven into the whispers, calling from the hollow tree. Sometimes, in the clearing, they find sketches, faces, eyes, hands, drawn by no one they know. The path stretches on, its end always just out of sight. its company never far behind. The forgotten clock. In the town of Greymere, there was a house at the end of a cobbled street, its windows dark, its garden overgrown. It was not abandoned, but it felt like it should be. The locals called it the clock house, for the ancient grandfather clock in its hall, its hands frozen at 3:17. No one knew why it stopped, or when, but they said it ticked once a year, on a night when the moon hung low. Margaret moved in during summer, a widow seeking a fresh start. The house was cheap, its silence a comfort after years of grief. She dusted the furniture, tended the garden, but left the clock alone. Its face was tarnished, its pendulum still, yet at night she felt it watching her, as if its silence held a weight. On her first night, as she lay in bed, she heard it, a single tick, sharp and clear, like a heartbeat waking. She checked the clock at dawn. Its hands hadn't moved. She blamed the house, its age, her tired mind. But the ticks continued, one each night, always at 3:17. She noticed other things, a chill in the hall, a shadow that lingered too long in the clock's reflection. She tried winding it, but the key wouldn't turn. One night, as the tick sounded, she heard a whisper, soft as dust. Time waits. Margaret was practical, not given to fancy. She stayed, cleaning, gardening, living around the clock. Her dreams grew strange. Visions of a woman in old-fashioned clothes, standing by the clock, her eyes fixed on the hands. Margaret began to wake at 3:17, her breath catching as the tick sounded, followed by the whisper. She searched the house, finding a hidden drawer in the clock's base. Inside was a locket, engraved with a name, Clara, and a date, faded but clear. 3:17. Decades passed. She kept the locket, feeling its weight as she moved through the house. The ticks grew louder, the whispers clearer. Time waits for you. Her dreams became memories she didn't own, of a woman waiting, counting seconds that never passed. One night, Margaret sat by the clock, waiting. At 3:17, the tick came, and the air turned cold, the locket warm in her hand. She opened it, revealing a portrait of the woman from her dreams, her eyes locked on Margaret's. The clock's hands twitched, just once, and the house seemed to sigh, its walls leaning closer. Margaret began to lose hours, waking to find herself in the hall, the clock's face brighter than it should be. She wrote letters, though she didn't know to whom, describing a time that wasn't hers. The villagers saw her less, her garden untended, her windows dark. One night, she stood by the clock, the locket open, and felt the air shift, as if time itself had paused. The tick came, and the whisper was her own voice, joined with another's. The next day, Margaret was gone. The villagers found the locket on the floor, open, its portrait faded to nothing. The clock stood silent, its hands still at 3:17. On moonlit nights, they hear it, a single tick, a whisper from the hall, calling for someone to wind the key. The clock house waits, its silence heavier than time itself, its rooms holding stories no one can tell. The silent guest, the boarding house on Willow Street, was a relic, its paint peeling, its floors creaking under every step. It was a place for travelers, for those passing through, but some said it kept its guests longer than they planned. The locals called it the widow's house, after the old woman who ran it, her eyes sharp despite her age. She never spoke of the room at the end of the hall, the one always locked, the one no one rented. Samuel arrived in fall, a writer seeking quiet to finish his novel. The house was cheap, its rooms warm despite the chill outside. The widow was kind, her voice soft, but she avoided the locked room, her gaze darting away when Samuel asked about it. His room was cozy, its window overlooking a garden of wilted roses. At night he heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing the hall outside his door. He thought it was another guest, but the widow swore he was alone. The footsteps came each night, always stopping at the locked door. Samuel noticed other things. A cold draft from under that door, a faint scent of lavender that wasn't there before. One night, the footsteps paused outside his room, and a whisper slipped through the keyhole. "Stay with me." Samuel was curious, not fearful. He stayed, writing by day, listening by night. The widow grew nervous, urging him to focus on his work, to ignore the hall. He found a key hidden in a drawer, old and tarnished, and waited until the widow slept. At midnight, he unlocked the door. The room was empty, its air still, but the lavender scent was thick, and the floorboards bore faint scratches, like footprints worn into the wood. He returned each night, the room unchanged but heavier, as if it held a presence he couldn't see. The whispers grew clearer, "Stay with me," and the footsteps followed him now, even in daylight. He began to write stories he didn't remember starting, tales of a woman who waited in a locked room, her voice calling through the walls. The widow watched him, her eyes knowing, but she said nothing. One night, Samuel woke to find the key in his hand, the locked door ajar. Inside, a figure sat in the dark, a woman, her face hidden, her voice the whisper he knew. The door closed behind him, and the house was quiet. The widow found his manuscript the next morning, its pages filled with a story he hadn't written, a tale of a guest who stayed too long. Samuel was gone, the locked room empty once more. The scent of lavender lingers on Willow Street, where the widow's house stands, its locked room waiting. At night, the locals hear footsteps, two sets now, pacing the hall, and the widow's eyes grow sharper, as if she knows who comes next. The house holds its guests, not with chains, but with whispers, with stories that never end, with a silence that invites you to stay. The Shadow in the Attic, In the quiet town of Haverfield, there was a house on a hill, its roof sagging, its paint chipped by years of neglect. It wasn't grand, but it wasn't small either. Just a two-story home with a steep staircase leading to an attic no one used. The locals called it the Weaver House, after a family long gone, and they avoided it, saying the attic held more than cobwebs, that shadows moved where light should be. Amelia arrived in late fall, a seamstress seeking a fresh start after a broken engagement. The house was affordable, its rooms spacious enough for her sewing machines and fabric rolls. She ignored the attic at first, its door locked with a rusty bolt. But at night, as she worked by lamplight, she heard it, soft scratches like nails on wood, coming from above. She told herself it was mice, or the wind, or the house, settling into its old bones. The scratches grew louder each night, forming a rhythm, like someone pacing the attic floor. Amelia checked the door, finding it still locked, but the air around it was cold, heavier than the rest of the house. One night, as she sewed a dress, the scratches stopped, replaced by a faint tapping, deliberate, like a signal. She climbed the stairs, her candle flickering, and pressed her ear to the door. A whisper came, soft as frayed thread. "See me." Amelia was practical, not prone to fear. She found the key in a drawer, its edges worn smooth, and unlocked the attic. The air inside was stale, the floor covered in dust, but there were marks, faint outlines, like someone had walked in circles for years. She found a mirror in the corner, its glass clouded, reflecting nothing but shadows. As she turned to leave, the mirror flickered, showing not her face, but another's, pale, eyeless, its mouth moving without sound. She locked the door and avoided the attic, but the scratches returned, now joined by footsteps that followed her through the house. Her dreams filled with the attic, with a figure weaving shadows into shapes she couldn't name. She found threads on her sewing table, black and coarse, not from her spools. One night, she woke to find her latest dress undone, its seams unraveled, stitched instead with those strange threads into patterns that hurt to look at. Amelia began to spend her days in the attic, drawn to the mirror. She spoke to it, asking questions it never answered, but the air grew warm, as if listening. She found a journal hidden under a floorboard, its pages filled with sketches of a woman weaving, her hands blurred, her face a shadow. The last entry read, "She sees me now." Amelia's own sketches changed, her lines forming faces she didn't draw, eyes that watched from the paper. The villagers noticed her absence. Her windows stayed dark, her garden untended. One night, a neighbor climbed the hill and found the house silent, the attic door open. The mirror was gone, but the floor bore fresh footprints, circling endlessly. Amelia was nowhere, her sewing machine still, its needle threaded with black. On quiet nights, the locals hear scratches from the hill, and some say they see a shadow in the attic window, weaving something that isn't cloth, something that moves. Still pond, beyond the village of Thornwick. There was a pond, its surface smooth as glass, untouched by wind or ripples. It lay in a hollow, surrounded by willows that drooped like mourners. The locals called it the Still Pond, and they avoided it, saying it held more than water, that its depths kept secrets no one could name. They told stories of things seen in its reflection, things that weren't there. Lucas moved to Thornwick in early winter, a photographer seeking inspiration after years in the city. The pond drew him, its stillness a contrast to the chaos he'd left behind. He set up his camera by its edge, capturing its surface, but the photos showed smudges, shapes that didn't match the trees or sky. At night, as he reviewed his work, he heard it, a low hum, like a voice underwater, coming from the pond. He returned each day, drawn to the water. The hum grew clearer, forming words. Look deeper. Lucas leaned over the pond, his reflection sharp, but something moved beneath it. A shadow, not his, gliding under the surface. He snapped a photo, and the image showed a face, pale and blurred, its eyes wide, staring back. He told himself it was a trick of light, a flaw in the lens, but the hum followed him home, echoing in his dreams. Lucas found an old book in the village library, its pages brittle, detailing the pond's history. A woman had drowned there decades ago, her body never found, her name forgotten. The book mentioned whispers, reflections that didn't belong, and villagers who vanished after lingering too long. Lucas ignored the warnings, setting up camp by the pond. He spoke to the water, asking for its story, and the hum answered, softer, almost pleading. One night, he saw it, a figure in the pond, not a reflection, standing in the shallows. Its face was his, but older, its eyes hollow. He reached out, and the water was warm, pulling at his fingers. His camera captured images he didn't take, hands reaching from the water, faces pressed against the surface. Lucas began to feel the pond's pull, even in his sleep, dreaming of sinking into its depths, of joining the shadows below. The villagers noticed his absence. His camp was empty, his camera left by the pond, its last photo showing only water, smooth and still. They drained the pond years later, finding nothing but mud and roots. But on windless nights, they hear a hum, low and steady, and some see faces in the hollow, reflections that linger when no one stands there. The still pond waits, its surface unbroken, its depths calling for the next to look deeper. The unlit room. In the town of Cresthaven, there was a house on a quiet street. Its facade plain, its windows always shuttered, The house was affordable, its rooms bright, but the locked door bothered her. She asked the landlord, who shrugged, saying it was storage, nothing more. At night, as she graded papers, a hum grew each night, forming a rhythm like a heartbeat behind the wood. Eliza found a key in the basement, its surface scratched. Hawkins as the landlord. The room was bare, its walls gray, but the shadows moved, shifting in corners where no light reached. She saw it once, a figure in the dark, its outline blurred, its presence silent but heavy. The hum became words. Opened the door. Eliza stayed, grading papers, ignoring the hum. But her dreams filled with the room, with a figure that watched without eyes, its hands reaching for the knob. She found papers in the house, old letters not in her hand, describing a tenant who'd lived there, who'd locked the room and never returned. One night, she unlocked the door, and the air was thick, the shadows alive, moving toward her. She felt a pull, like a hand guiding her inside, and the door closed softly behind her. The next day, the house was quiet. The villagers found the key. The room empty, but the shadows lingered, heavier than before. Eliza was gone, her papers scattered, filled with words she hadn't written, descriptions of a room that never lit, of a figure that waited inside. On quiet nights, the locals hear a hum, and some see a flicker in the unlit room's window, as if someone is still there, waiting for the next key to turn. The faded portrait. In the village of Dunmere, there was a manor, its stone walls weathered, its halls echoing with forgotten footsteps. A portrait hung in the parlor, its colors faded, its subject, a woman no one named. The locals called it the Gray Lady's house, saying the portrait watched, its eyes following those who lingered too long. They avoided the manor, whispering of a presence that never left. Nathan arrived in summer, an historian researching old families. The manor was a rental, its rooms filled with dusty relics. He studied the portrait, its subject stern, her gaze piercing. At night, as he read by candlelight, he heard it, a soft rustle like silk brushing stone coming from the parlor. He checked, finding the portrait unchanged, but its eyes seemed brighter, sharper in the dark. The rustle returned nightly, joined by a whisper, "Know me." Nathan found diaries in the attic, their pages detailing a woman, Eleanor Gray, who'd lived alone, her life a mystery. The diaries spoke of shadows that followed her, of eyes in the walls. Nathan began to dream of her, standing by the portrait, her hands outstretched. He found a locket in the frame, its image matching the portrait, its clasp warm to the touch. One night, he stood before the portrait, the whisper clear. Know me now. The air grew heavy, the locket pulsing in his hand. The portrait's eyes moved just once, and the manor seemed to breathe, its walls closing in. Nathan was gone by morning, the locket open, its image blank. The villagers hear rustles on quiet nights, and some see eyes in the parlor, watching from a portrait that never fades, waiting for the next to know its name. The endless stare. In the hamlet of Bright Hollow, there was a tower, its stones moss-covered, its spire lost in the mist. It had no name, but the locals called it the Stair, for the spiral staircase that climbed its core, leading nowhere. They said it was cursed, that those who climbed too high never came down. The tower stood apart, its shadow long, its silence deep. Rebecca arrived in autumn, a poet seeking solitude. The tower was part of her rental, its door always open, its stairs worn smooth. At night as she wrote, she heard it. Soft steps, echoing from the tower, climbing without end. She checked, finding the stairs empty, but the air was heavy, as if someone had just passed. The steps returned each night, joined by a whisper. Climb with me. Rebecca explored the tower, its stairs circling upward, the walls cold under her touch. She found carvings, faint names, etched by hands long gone. Her poems changed, filled with lines she didn't write, verses of a climber who never stopped. One night, she followed the steps, the whisper guiding her higher. The air grew warm, the carvings sharper, and the stairs seemed to stretch, endless in the dark. She was gone by dawn, her notebook left at the tower's base, its pages filled with a poem of a stair that never ended, of a figure that climbed beside her. The villagers hear steps on misty nights, and some see a shadow on the spire, climbing forever, waiting for the next to join the endless stair.